the types of stresses that those guys would experience was usually mortal threat to, to their lives, getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger. So if you look from a physiological perspective, what is actually happening inside your brain and your body? So the human stress response system was designed to be adaptive for our ancestors who stood up, in the Africa 250,000 years ago. So the types of stresses that those guys would experience was usually mortal threat to, to their lives, getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger or a grizzly bear. And so our stress response system is highly adapted for that type of stress. So we'd get this cascading series of, biochemical reactions like adrenaline and cortisol that would give us resources to fight or flee. Amazing, in those times it kept our ancestors alive. But in those days, hopefully you'd fight that bear, drag it into the cave and be having a nice tasty bear steak all snuggled up with a fire. You're safe. And then you could down-regulate, or the bear would get you. And either way, your stress would go down, right? And so it was designed to go up and then go down. But you think about our modern society and what leaders have to deal with. We've got, multiple technologies. We've got thousands of people. We've got dings in our face. We've got these little dopamine, phones in our, pushing dopamine to our skulls every day. This is unsustainable for our primitive stress response system. And so it will betray us in those most critical moments when we have to think deeply. And usually it's social stress, it's complex stress. We're looking at, taxation law. We're looking at, marketing strategies. We're looking at our competitors. These are very, very sort of sophisticated, complex operations that require multiple different facets of your brain operating at the same time. And when you're under primitive stress or stress, where we think that this is really critical, our brains will shut off those parts of our executive functioning, and it'll send energy to our heart and lungs and our big muscle groups to fight or flee. This is a terrible disconnect between what's happening in our brains and bodies and what we need in these moments where we need an intelligent brain. And so we become reactive, and stress will house or shelve any non-essential activity in our brains and bodies that are not immediately for survival. So we see our digestion change. Your mouth will go dry just when you're about to public speak. You get a dysregulated gut. You don't, digest food in the same way. You actually suck out more calories out of food when you're stressed out, so it makes you put on weight. Your immune system will stop working efficiently. And so as I said before, this is not a sustainable profile for a leader, because what I've seen from my data, you can run in the red for about 8 weeks, and then after 8 weeks, something will snap, some circuit breaker. Will it be mental, be it physical, be it something, your relationship? I see 8 weeks is around the time where you can go on like hardcore red, and then you can't.
So would you say they are then some of the early warning signs that a leader's pace is affecting them? Or what are those signs that, okay, this is, just a generally demanding period, or no, I'm in an unsustainable pace that I can't maintain? And then I guess two-pronged question, and then how does that affect their team?
Well, this is it. This is the thing that often when we look at our data and when I work with leaders, they have very low insight into just how much their cognitive ability, their performance has been degraded under stress. They think they're firing maybe 80%, but they're actually firing at 50%. And this is the biggest thing. Like, people around them can see you're not okay. You're making stupid decisions, risky decisions. You become, cognitively myopic. You're not very cognitively flexible. These are all the consequences of stress, but you are totally unaware of it. And what we see is that people have different stress tolerances depending on a huge range of factors. So there's epigenetics, there's genetics, there's your intrauterine environment. So how stressed your mother was inside her belly. If she was very, very stressed, you've got lots of stress receptors in your brain. You can become quite dramatic or even seek stress unhealthily. Then we've got things like your life situation, your financial situation, how much social support you have, how much capacity you think you have, even things like moving house, your physical health, like do you have a chronic sickness? Do you have children who are sick? And then there's even more like day-to-day things, how much sleep you've had, how much sleep deprivation you're under. And then also things like how much blood glucose you have. If you have fluctuating blood glucose, we know it makes you highly emotionally reactive. And so when you think about, am I in the right state to make very big decisions right now? These are all the factors you should be looking at. And if any of those things are screaming red at you, think maybe I will delay this really important decision till I maybe have got my blood sugar under control. Maybe I've had a sleep. Maybe a day when I haven't had a massive fight with my kids or my partner, or maybe when, I haven't got a whole lot of other, seriously important decisions to make it work. So know thyself, really understand that your capacity to deal with stress, it fluctuates over time. And what hurts you doesn't make you stronger always. It's not always, that's a myth. And so what you should do is have a very, I suppose, good, tight team of people who you rely on and that you can trust, who will say, hey, I think you're like, I don't know, not quite correct on this decision, or are you okay? You should be really looking for contributory dissent. So you should be really asking those around you, what are we missing here? What have I got this wrong? Poke holes in my rationale. Help me understand whether or not we're making the accurate decision, because we know that when you're stressed, you're more likely to make decisions quickly, 30% quicker, with incomplete information. And when you're stressed out, you tend to overestimate the positives of your decision, underestimate the negatives of your decision. And if new information comes in that's antithesis to what you've agreed on, you're 40% less likely to change your mind. So these are really good, important things to keep in mind when you feel like you're not doing so well.
And you mentioned sleep, and I think it's such an important topic for us to go into. It's obviously something that you're an expert in, and it's something that you and I have spoken about personally offline. What role does sleep and recovery, and to extend on what you've already spoken about, boundaries, play in sustainable leadership?
Yeah, so I actually forgot to answer the second part of your question about what does it mean for your team when you're stressed out? And then I'll go on to sleep. So what we know is we did a big study with McKinsey and Amy Edmondson from Harvard looking at psychological safety. And for those that don't know, psychological safety is literally just group trust. So it's when you have the confidence and you feel safe to speak up, voice things that you see as wrong, offer alternatives, ideas, and, be able to criticize each other without fear of reparation. And what we saw was we put the Whoop devices on nearly 200 leaders, and then we asked their subordinates, how much psychological safety or trust did you feel in the last meeting with your boss? Then we looked at the boss's data. We looked at how stressed they were, how sleep deprived they were, and we found a really, really interesting correlation, which we never thought we'd find. But we found that those leaders who were stressed and sleep deprived, the next day, their team members did not feel psychologically safe, and which was really interesting because often these subordinates had no idea what the boss was doing the night before, right? So there was obviously some kind of transmission of mood or attitude or something that just sort of squashed the subordinates' confidence in being able to speak up. And so if you're in person, we know that if a leader is stressed and sleep deprived, they will produce cortisol, and people in your vicinity, it's called chemo signaling. They can pick up these very minute volatile compounds that someone produces, and they catch it. We've got receptors on our skin and our paranasal sinuses that help us make inferences about the emotions of those around us. And subordinates are very, very good at picking up the feeling of what the boss has, because it behoves them to know, is the boss in a bad mood? Am I, in trouble or not? And so what we see is that if you are a boss, you're stressed out, you're sleep deprived, your team catches it. It's incredibly potent and very, very highly contagious. Your mood and your state, it just kind of like drips down through your team. So you have a moral obligation not only to keep your emotions regulated, but because if you don't, your team will catch your emotions. We see it, more likely to come down from above. And what we find is that psychological safety gets crushed by a leader's sleep deprivation status. And we know that psychological safety is leader-led, and as Google found out, is the most important singular factor for high-performing teams. They looked at 100